The cargo bay smelled like rust and recycled air as Kira Chen checked her datapad for the third time that hour. Confirming the inventory numbers matched what the computer claimed was stored in Section 7 Delta of the Verdant Exchange Station. Was 19 standard years old and had been working the night shift for 6 months now, ever since her family's transport business went under and left. Her stranded on this massive orbital trading hub where 100 different alien species bought and sold goods from across the galaxy, humans were still the new kids in galactic society, and most aliens treated them like adorable children or harmless pets who had stumbled into the big leagues without really understanding how the game was. Played Kira didn't mind the condescending attitudes most days because the pay was decent, and the work was simple enough that she could do it half asleep tonight, though something felt wrong. The first camera went dark at 0200 hours and Kira noticed because she had been waving at it during her patrol like she always did when boredom set in. During the long shifts, the second camera failed 10 minutes. Later by 02304 cameras in her section were completely offline, and the hair on the back of her neck was standing up in a way that made her think of her grandfather's old stories about hunting trips back on Earth. She reached for her communicator to report the malfunction to station security when she heard the heavy footsteps echoing from the main corridor entrance. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, and Kira's breath caught in her throat as she recognized them as Vracs from their distinctive reptilian features and the way they moved with. Predatory Grace Vracs were known throughout the galaxy as enforcers and smugglers who hired themselves out to whoever paid enough and didn't ask questions about methods. Their scaled skin was dark green and covered in patterns that seemed to shift in the dim emergency lighting, and their eyes reflected the light like a cat's eyes back on Earth. The leader was massive even by Vrac standards, and he smiled at Kira with too many teeth as his crew fanned out to block the exits. Little human, he said in heavily accented but understandable galactic common, "You have seen something you should not have seen." Kira's mind raced back through the past week's cargo manifests, and suddenly she remembered the unmarked containers in Bay 7 Delta 16 that had arrived without proper documentation. She had filed a report about them like she was supposed to, but nothing had come of it, and she had assumed someone higher up had approved them. Now she understood that someone higher up had been paid to approve them. "I don't know what you're talking about," Kira said, and was proud that her voice only shook a little. The Vrax leader laughed, and it sounded like rocks grinding together. "The bioweapons in the containers you reported," he said, "are worth more than your entire pathetic species makes in a year, and we cannot have some curious human child causing problems." His crew moved closer, and Kira could smell them now, like old leather and something metallic that made her stomach turn. "The cameras are off," the leader continued, "and no one patrols this section during night shift, and you are alone and very far from help." He pulled out a wicked-looking blade that curved like a talon. "No witnesses and no escape," he said, "and when they find your body, it will look like an unfortunate accident with the cargo machinery." Kira's heart was hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears, and her hands were shaking as the 3 Variks closed in around her. They were bigger than her and stronger than her, and they had weapons, while all she had was a multi-tool on her belt and a datapad in her hands. The rational part of her brain was screaming that she should beg or plead, or offer them money, or promise she wouldn't tell anyone, but something else was waking up inside her chest, and it felt cold and sharp, and it reminded her of the stories her grandfather used to tell about survival. He had been a soldier before he became a cargo hauler, and he had fought in the resource wars back on Earth before humanity joined the galactic community. She remembered sitting on his knee when she was small and listening to him talk about fear and what humans did when they were cornered. Humans didn't get to the top of Earth's food chain by running away, he had said. And we didn't survive ice ages and plagues and wars by being weak when something tries to kill you. He had told her with his scarred hands on her shoulders, "You remember that your ancestors were the scariest damn predators. Their planet ever produced." The lead Vrax lunged forward with his blade extended, and Kira did something that surprised even herself. She threw her datapad directly at his face, with all the strength in her arm, and the heavy device cracked against his snout hard enough to make him stagger. Then she ran, not toward the exits they were blocking, but deeper into the maintenance section where the corridors became narrow and twisted and full of pipes and conduits that only someone who worked here Every knight would know how to navigate behind her. She heard the Vrock's leader roar in anger and pain, and then the heavy sound of pursuit as all three of them charged after her. Grandfather's voice echoed in her head as she ran through the darkness. "If you can't win by being stronger," he had said, "then you win by being smarter and meaner and more willing to do whatever it takes to survive." Kira's fear was still there, burning in her gut, but it was changing into something else. Knows something that felt like anger. These aliens thought she was prey and thought she would just lie down and die because humans were soft and weak and new to the galaxy. They were about to learn that humans became the dominant species on Earth by being the most dangerous thing in any room. They walked into the maintenance tunnels stretched out before her in the dim red emergency lighting, and Kira Chen smiled without humor as she planned her next move. The Vracks wanted to hunt her in the dark with no witnesses and no escape find. They were about to find out what happened when you cornered something that evolved from persistence hunters and tool users who had turned an entire planet into their hunting ground. The game had just begun, and Kira was done being prey. The maintenance shafts of Section 7 Delta were amazed that Kira had walked 1,000 times during her 6 months on the station, and she knew every pipe and valve and access panel like she knew the back of her own hand. Vracks crashed through the corridors behind her with all the subtlety of a freight hauler, and she could hear them snarling to each other in their own language as they pursued split up. The leader commanded in Galactic Common, "She cannot hide from all of us." Kira pressed herself into a service alcove barely wide enough for her slim human frame, and held her breath as one of the Vracks thundered past her position. His scaled face was turned forward, watching the corridor ahead, and he never thought to look to the sides, where a smaller creature might squeeze into spaces his bulk could never fit. As soon as he passed, Kira pulled her multi-tool from her belt and flipped it open. To the cutting torch setting, she had used this tool hundreds of times to repair damaged cargo containers and slice through broken equipment, and now she applied it to the power conduit running along the wall next to her hiding spot. The torch cut through the protective casing with a shower of sparks and then bit into the main power line beneath her. Lights in this entire subsection died instantly and plunged everything into absolute darkness behind her. Kira heard the Vracks who had passed her stumble and curse, and Vracks had excellent vision in daylight conditions, but their eyes were adapted for their homeworlds. Bright twin suns, and they struggled in complete darkness. Human eyes, though, had evolved to hunt during dawn and dusk, and to navigate by starlight and firelight. Kira could see the faint outline of the Vracks ahead of her, silhouetted against the emergency lighting from the next corridor section. She moved forward silently on the balls of her feet, the way her grandfather had taught her during their camping trips in the mountains back home. Vracks was turned away from her, trying to activate a light on his weapon. Neskara picked up a heavy pipe wrench from a maintenance kit on the wall and tested its weight in her hands. It was solid and heavy. It would make an excellent club shy. Stepped forward and swung the wrench with every ounce of strength in her shoulders and connected with the base of the Vrax's skull, right where his spine met his brain case. The impact made a sound like a melon breaking, and the Vrax dropped like his strings had been cut. Kira stood over him, breathing hard and waiting to see if he would get back up. He didn't move. She had just killed someone, and the thought should have horrified her, but all she felt was a cold satisfaction and the knowledge that the odds were now slightly less terrible. Two left. She could hear them calling for their fallen comrade and crashing through the dark corridors trying to find him. Kira moved in the opposite direction, working her way toward the zero-gravity storage bays, where the most valuable and fragile cargo was kept in weightless condition. She knew the Vracks would follow eventually, because there were only so many places to go in this section. The door to Storage Bay 12 opened with her access code, and Kira slipped inside, then sealed it behind her. Though gravity cut out immediately, and she began to float in the vast open space filled with cargo containers suspended in the darkness. This was her territory now. She had spent months learning to navigate in zero-G. While the Vracks were heavy world species who relied on strength and mass in zero gravity, those advantages became liabilities. The door exploded inward 10 minutes later, As the two remaining Vraks forced it open with a plasma cutter, they tumbled into the bay, awkwardly trying to orient themselves in the unfamiliar environment. "Come out, little human," the leader called, "and we will make it quick." Kira was already moving, using the cargo containers as cover and pushing off from surfaces with practiced efficiency. Had rigged a surprise while waiting for them to arrive. The compressed air canister she had found in the emergency supplies was old and probably should have been replaced years ago. That made it perfect for her purposes because the safety valve was corroded and weak shit had wedged it between two cargo containers and pointed it at the center of the bay, then tied a length of cable to the valve release. Now she yanked the cable hard, and the valve tore free under the pressure. The canister became a missile as compressed air erupted from one end and sent it spinning wildly through the bay like a deadly pinball. The first Vrax didn't even have time to scream as the heavy metal cylinder caught him in the chest with the force of a small vehicle and crushed his ribcage. His body tumbled away, trailing blood droplets that formed floating spheres in the zero gravity. The leader roared in rage and fear, and Kira saw something in his eyes that she recognized. He was afraid of her now. The human prey had killed two of his crew and turned his hunt into a nightmare. "What are you?" He screamed into the darkness. Kira's voice came from everywhere at once as she moved between the containers. "I'm human," she said, "and humans are very good at killing things that try to kill us first." She had found another weapon now in the form of a cargo hook with a long handle and a wicked point designed for moving containers in. Zero-G Vrax's leader was spinning, trying to track her voice, but he was disoriented and clumsy in the weightless environment. Kira pushed off hard from a container and came at him from above with the cargo. Cook extended like a spear. The point punched through the lighter scales on his throat and came out the other side in a spray of dark blood. His eyes went wide with shock, and his hands came up to grasp the handle, but Kira had already let go and was pushing away. She watched him die as he floated there, drowning in his own blood in the zero gravity, unable to even fall down the way nature intended. Took almost 3 minutes, and Kira didn't look away when it was over. She floated among the bodies in the spreading clouds of blood and felt nothing but a cold emptiness. These creatures had tried to kill her, and she had defended herself. That was what humans did. That was what her species had always done. But she wasn't done yet because the Virax leader had mentioned allies and corruption, and that meant more of them would come. She needed to get evidence and get it to someone who couldn't be bought. She needed to survive long enough to make sure. These deaths meant something. Kira pulled herself to the bay exit and back into the corridors where gravity reasserted itself. Her hands were shaking now as the adrenaline started to fade, and she realized what she had just done. 3 sentient beings were dead by her hand, and she was covered in their blood, but she was alive. She keyed her multi-tool to record mode and started documenting everything as she made her way toward the communications hub. The hunt wasn't over yet, but the roles had been reversed now. She was the one hunting, and her prey was the truth that someone had tried very hard to bury. Kira made it 2 corridors before the shaking got so bad she had to stop and lean against a wall while her body processed what had just happened in the storage. Bashi had killed 3 people, and even though they had been trying to kill her first, the reality of it was hitting her like a physical weight. Her hands were still covered in dark Vrax blood, and there were flecks of it on her work uniform. She wanted to throw up, but forced herself to breathe slowly and think about what came next. Rax's leader had talked about allies and corruption, which meant someone in station security was helping them. If she went to the wrong person with her story, she would disappear just as permanently as if the Rax had succeeded in their hunt. She needed proof that couldn't be ignored or buried. The multi-tool in her hand had a basic recording function, and she had already started documenting the bodies and the weapons and the containers full of illegal bioweapons, but it wasn't enough because data could be erased and evidence could be lost. She needed something bigger. Communications hub in Section 7 Delta was 3 levels up and half a kilometer forward, but the route there would take her through more monitored areas where the cameras were still functioning. That meant whoever was helping the Vrax would see her coming unless she gave them something else to look at. Kira pulled out the datapad she had taken from the first Vrax she killed and managed to crack its basic security. Using a trick she had learned from a Thelian tech worker, the files inside made her blood run cold, The bioweapons in the unmarked containers were plague samples designed to target specific genetic markers. If released, they could wipe out entire populations of species that someone wanted eliminated. There were purchase orders from 3 different crime syndicates and shipping manifests that showed this wasn't the first shipment through the Burden Exchange. Someone had been running this operation for months and moving enough weaponized plague to kill billions. The names on the authorization documents included a station security lieutenant named Vex and to cargo supervisors in other sections. These people had sold out entire species for money. Kira felt the cold anger in her chest grow hotter. She started moving again. But now she had a plan. The emergency supply lockers in the maintenance areas contained bright orange marker paint used for highlighting damaged sections and warning workers about hazards. Kira grabbed 3 cans and started painting as she walked on every wall and bulkhead. She wrote simple messages in letters: 2 feet high bioweapons in bay, 7 deltas, 16 VRAC smugglers, paid off station security, human worker attacked, cameras disabled. She painted the names of the corrupt officials. She painted directions to the evidence. She painted a trail that any investigation would have to follow, even if she didn't make it to tell the story herself. The paint was bright and impossible to ignore, and she made sure to put it where the working crews would see it. When the day shift started in 4 hours, it was a breadcrumb trail written in emergency orange that screamed for attention. Behind her, she heard alarms starting to sound. As someone discovered the bodies in the storage bay, that meant she was running out of time. Kira broke into a run, heading for the maintenance stairs that would take her up to level 5, where the communications hub was located. Her legs burned and her lungs ached, but she pushed herself harder because stopping meant dying. She had made it to level 4 when she heard the voices ahead seal this section. Someone commanded in Galactic Common, "Human can't be allowed to reach communications." It was a voice she recognized from security briefings Lieutenant Vexy had brought back up, and they were cutting off her route. Kira ducked into a side passage and pressed herself against the wall while her mind raced. She was 1 level away from her goal, but they knew where she was going. The direct route was blocked, so she needed to find another way. The ventilation shafts were too small for most species, but humans were flexible, and Kira was thin from months of cheap station food. She pried open an access panel and crawled inside, ignoring the way the metal edges scraped her arms. The shaft was barely wide enough for her shoulders and pitch black. She crawled forward, using touch and memory to navigate toward where she thought the communications hub should be. Behind her, she heard Lieutenant Vex ordering his people to check the vents. "Humans are small," he said. "She might try to hide in their footsteps." Approached her position. Kira found a junction where 2 shafts met and wedged herself into the vertical shaft. Leading up, her arms and legs braced against the walls, supporting her weight as someone shined a light into the horizontal shaft. She had just left nothing here. A voice called. The light clicked off and the footsteps retreated. Kira waited another minute, then started climbing up the vertical shaft using the maintenance rungs that were spaced for longer. Alien limbs. Her arms screamed in protest, but she forced herself to keep going. The shaft opened into a ceiling space above the communications hub, and Kira could see through a grating into the room below was empty. She dropped down as quietly as she could and sealed the vent behind her. The communications console was locked, but she still had the VRAX datapad, and it had override codes that someone very stupid had left in the files within 2 minutes. She had access to the station-wide emergency broadcast system. Her hands shook as she uploaded all the evidence from the datapad and her own recordings. Then she set it to broadcast on every channel and every screen on the station. Before she hit send, she activated the console's camera and looked at herself. She was a mess. Her uniform was torn and bloody, and her face was streaked with grime and sweat. Her hair had come loose from its tie and hung in tangles around her shoulders. She looked like someone who had been fighting for her life. "Good. Let them see what their corruption had created. My name is Kira Chen," she said into the camera. "And I'm a cargo worker in Section 7 Delta. Tonight, 3 VRAX smugglers tried to kill me because I discovered bioweapons. They were trafficking through this station. They disabled the cameras and hunted me because they thought a human would be easy prey. They were wrong." She held up the VRAX datapad. "This contains evidence of plague weapons designed for genocide and the names of station security personnel. We're paid to look the other way. I'm broadcasting. This because I don't know who I can trust, and because if I die, someone needs to know the truth." Outside the door, she heard shouting and the sound of cutting equipment. They had found her. The Vraks are dead. She continued, speaking faster now. "And if Lieutenant Vex and his people kill me to cover this up, then I hope someone asks why a 19-year-old cargo worker was worth murdering." The door started to glow red as they cut through the locks. "Humans are new to the galaxy," Kira said. "And everyone thinks we're soft. But we survived ice ages and predators and plagues back on Earth by being tougher than anyone expected. We didn't get to the top of our world's food chain by giving up." The door burst open. Kira hit send, and the broadcast went live across every screen on the station. Lieutenant Vex came through first with his weapon drawn, but he froze when he saw the active broadcast camera behind him. Station security personnel poured in and then stopped, confused. The entire station was watching. There were no witnesses before, but now there were thousands. Kira smiled without humor and raised her hands. "No escape," she said. The communications hub erupted into chaos as Lieutenant Vex realized that every screen on the Verdant Exchange was broadcasting Kira's bloodied face and her accusations to thousands of witnesses across dozens of species. His weapon was still raised, but his hand was shaking because killing her now would only confirm everything she had just said. "Turn it off." He screamed at his subordinates. Shut down the broadcast, but Kira had locked the system using the Vraks override codes and set it to loop her message. Every 30 seconds, Evan, if they destroyed the console, the broadcast would keep running from the backup servers. One of the security officers stepped forward, and Kira recognized her as Sergeant Mira from the Thalian species who had always been kind during the morning shift changes. "Sir," Mira said slowly, "the entire station is watching this right now." Her large eyes were fixed on Kira, and the blood covering her uniform. "Is what she said true?" Mira asked, "About the bioweapons and the Vraks?" Lieutenant Vex's face went through several colors. "She's lying," he said. "She killed 3 Vraks in cold blood, and now she's making up stories to cover her crime." Kira laughed, and it came out harsh and bitter. "Then explain the override codes on this datapad," she said, holding it up, "and explain why the Vraks had authorization documents with your signature. Explain why they knew exactly when the cameras would be disabled in Section 7 Delta." She pulled up the files on the console screen, and suddenly the hub's displays were showing shipping manifests and payment records. The numbers were staggering. Lieutenant Vex had been paid over 2 million credits to facilitate the bioweapon trafficking. Other corrupt officials had received similar amounts. Sergeant Mira stepped away from Vex, like he was radioactive by the stars. She whispered, "This is real." Other security personnel were backing away too, as they realized what they were seeing. Vex's weapon swung wildly between Kira and his own people. "She's a murderer," shouted. "She killed 3 people in self-defense." Kira shot back after they cornered me and tried to make me disappear. The cameras were disabled, so there would be no witnesses and no evidence. They told me exactly what they planned to do before they tried to kill me. She pulled up the recording she had made in the storage bath. The console speakers crackled to life with the Vraks leader's voice saying, "No witnesses and no escape." Then came the sounds of the fight in the zero-gravity bay, and Kira's own voice calling out her actions as she defended herself. It was brutal and violent, and absolutely clear that she had been fighting for her life. "Gave them chances to stop," Kira said as the recording played. "I ran and hid and tried to get away, but they kept hunting me like I was an animal, so I stopped being prey." The recording ended with the Vraks leader's death and the awful gurgling sounds he made as he drowned in his own blood. The security officers in the room looked sick. Vex made his decision and lunged toward Kira with his weapon raised. He never made it, Sergeant. Mira moved faster than Kira had ever seen a Thelian move and tackled Vex to the ground. His weapon discharged into the ceiling, and then Mira had it twisted out of his hands. "You're under arrest," she said as other officers piled on to restrain him. "Ack!" For conspiracy and attempted murder, and about 50 other charges. Vex screamed and cursed, but they hauled him away in restraints. Myra turned to Kira, and her expression was complicated. "You killed 3 people." She said yes, Kira replied. "I did. They were trying to kill you." "Yes." Myra was quiet for a moment. "Most species would have died." she said finally. "The Vraks are apex predators on their homeworld. How did you survive?" Kira thought about her grandfather's stories and the cold calculation she had made in the darkness. "Humans are apex predators on our homeworld too," she said. "We just hide it better." Medical personnel arrived and tried to get Kira to sit down, but she refused until the broadcast finished its final loop. She needed to see it through. Station Director Quellen appeared on the emergency channels, demanding answers, and when he saw the evidence, his mandibles clicked in shock. "Seal Section 7 Delta," he ordered. "Secure all the containers, get hazmat teams down there immediately. And someone get that human girl medical attention before she collapses." Kira did collapse then, as the adrenaline finally ran out in her legs. Stopped supporting her weight. The last thing she saw before the medics caught her was Sergeant Mira's face. "You're going to be famous," Mira said, "or infamous, probably both." When Kira woke up, she was in the station medical center with tubes in her arms and monitors beeping around Hera. Doctor from the Keltharian species was checking her vitals and making notes. "You're awake," he said. "Good. You had us worried for a while." "How long?" Kira asked. Her throat felt like sandpaper. 14 hours, the doctor replied. "We're exhausted and dehydrated and had a dozen minor injuries, but you'll live." He paused and his expression became more serious. "The station is in chaos," he said. "Your broadcast caused quite a stir. The bioweapons have been secured, and the investigation has expanded to other stations. Lieutenant Vex and his accomplices are in custody. And you," he continued, "are either a hero or a vigilante. Depending on who you ask." Kira closed her eyes. "I just wanted to survive." She said. "Well, you did," the doctor replied. "And you exposed one of the largest smuggling operations in this sector. The galactic news networks are calling you. The human who fought back some species are calling for your arrest, and some are calling for medals. It's very complicated." Kira would have laughed, but it hurt too much through the window of her room. She could see other patients and medical staff moving around. Several of them looked at her with expressions ranging from fear to admiration to curiosity. She was different now. Not just another human cargo worker, but something else. Something that had reminded the galaxy that humans were more dangerous than they. Lukte legal representative arrived later that day to explain that she wouldn't be charged with any crimes related to the Vrak's death. Self-defense was recognized under galactic law, and the evidence clearly showed she had been attacked first. But there would be inquiries and testimony, and probably years of legal complications. Kira didn't care about any of that. She had survived. She had exposed the truth, and she had shown the galaxy that humans were not prey outside her window. The Verdant Exchange continued its endless orbit, and somewhere in the darkness between stars, the news of what happened was spreading. The story of a human girl who was cornered with no witnesses and no escapement, who decided that if she was going to die, then she would take her hunters with her. That was the most human thing of all. 2 weeks after the incident, Kira was finally cleared to leave the medical center and return to her quarters in the residential section of the Verdant Exchange. The station felt different. Now people stared at her as she walked through the corridors, and most of them moved out of her way without being asked. Some of the stares were afraid, and some were respectful, and a few were openly hostile, from species who thought she had overreacted or who had business relationships with the Vrax clans. Kira kept her head up and walked like she owned the corridor. Her grandfather had taught her that showing weakness invited predators, and she was done being seen as weak. The galactic news networks had been running her story nonstop for days. Footage of her broadcast had been viewed billions of times across hundreds of worlds, except psyche experts were debating what it meant that humans could switch from friendly cooperation to lethal violence. So quickly, military analysts were studying her tactics and writing papers about human adaptability in combat situations. Species were demanding that humans be classified as a potential threat species. Others were rushing to establish better diplomatic relationships because they didn't want to be on the wrong side of a species that produced survivors like Kira Chunda. The phrase "cornered human" had entered the galactic lexicon as shorthand for a dangerous situation that was about to get much worse. Kira's message box was flooded with thousands of communications job offers from private security firms who wanted to hire her as a consultant interview. Requests from journalists across the galaxy. Marriage Proposals from humans who thought she was a hero death, threats from Vrax sympathizers who wanted revenges. She deleted most of them without reading. A few she forwarded to station security because they contained credible threats. Rest just didn't matter. What mattered was that the bioweapons had been destroyed and the smuggling network had been shut down. 17 other stations had found similar operations after investigations were launched. Hundreds of corrupt officials had been arrested. Thousands of containers of illegal weapons had been seized. The Galactic Council had passed emergency legislation increasing oversight of cargo inspection procedures because one human cargo worker had refused to die. Quietly, station director Quellen had personally apologized to Kira and offered her a promotion to senior cargo supervisor. With a substantial pay increase, she had turned it down. Director of station security Mira, who had been promoted after Vex's arrest, had offered her a position in the security division. She had turned that down. To what Kira wanted was simple. She wanted to go back to her job in Section 7 Delta and do her work and be left alone. Station administration had agreed after she signed enough legal documents to fill a cargo container. There were conditions, of course. She had to attend counseling sessions with a trauma specialist. She had to check in with security every week. She had to agree not to speak to the press without approval from the legal department. Kira agreed to all of it because she just wanted her life back. The counseling sessions were actually helpful. The Keltharian therapist didn't try to tell her she was wrong for defending herself. Instead, they worked on processing what she had experienced and developing coping strategies for the nightmares that still woke her up. Some nights you did what you had to do to survive, the therapist told her. And that's not something to be ashamed of, but it's okay to feel conflicted about it. Killing is supposed to be hard even when it's justified. Kira appreciated that he didn't try to make it simple on her first day back. At work, she walked into Section 7 Delta. I found that someone had painted a mural on the wall near the entrance. It showed a small figure standing over 3 larger ones. The artistic style was from the Thalian tradition, and it was surprisingly beautiful. Underneath, someone had written in Galactic Common, "Here a human chose to survive." Kira stood looking at it for a long time. The other cargo workers gave her space and didn't ask questions. They had all heard the story, and most of them treated her with a careful respect that felt strange. She got to work checking inventory and running diagnostics and doing all the boring routine tasks that had been her life before everything changed. Felt good to have something normal to focus on. 3 hours into her shift, a new worker showed up for orientation. Was young and from a species called the Fremen, who were small and looked a bit like bipedal rabbits. He was clearly nervous about working in Section 7 Delta given what had happened. "Here, is it true?" he asked Kira when they were introduced. "The stories about you and the Vrax?" Kira considered her answer. She could downplay it or change the subject, but that would be a lie. "Yes," she said simply. "It's true." The young Fremen's ears flattened against his head. "Were you scared?" he asked, terrified. Kira replied honestly. "But being scared doesn't mean you stop fighting. It just means you're still alive enough to be afraid." He thought about that. "My people are prey species," he said quietly. "On our homeworld, we survived by running and hiding. Most species tell us we're cowards." Kira shook her head. "Surviving takes courage no matter how you do it," she said. "Running away from something that wants to kill you isn't cowardly, it's smart. The Vrax didn't give me the option to run, so I had to fight, but if I could have escaped without killing them, I would have." The Fremen relaxed a little. "I'm glad you survived," he said. Over the following weeks, Kira settled back into her routine, though. Attention from the rest of the galaxy gradually faded as new stories took over the news cycles. She was yesterday's sensation, and that was fine with Herb, but things had changed in ways that couldn't be undone. Human diplomats reported that negotiations with other species had become easier when humans spoke now. Other species listened with more respect. The image of humanity as harmless newcomers had been shattered by footage of Kira covered in blood and defiance. Some humans loved that, others worried about the implications. Kira didn't have an opinion either way. She had just done what she needed to do. Evening, as she was finishing her shift, a group of Vrax walked into Section 7 Delta. Kira's hand went automatically to her multi-tool. But these Variks were wearing Merchant Guild colors, and their body language was non-threatening. Leader approached carefully Kira-chin. He said in heavily accented common, "I am Sorenth of the merchant clan Vrex. I come to speak with you if you permit." Kira tensed, but nodded. "The ones you killed," Sorenth said, "were from the warrior clan, and were acting dishonorably. They shamed our species with their crimes. We do not seek revenge." He produced a small carved stone and offered it to Kira. "This is a marker of respect." He said, "Among our people, we give it to worthy opponents. You fought 3 Vrax warriors in conditions that favored them, and you survived. That is worthy of recognition." Kira took the stone slowly, was warm and smooth, and carved with symbols she didn't recognize. "I don't want to be your enemy," she said. "Nor we yours," Sorenth replied. "The galaxy is large enough for both our peoples, but now they know that humans are not prey." After he left, Kira held the stone and thought about what it represented. Respect earned through violence wasn't what she would have chosen, but it was what she had 6 months later. Kira was still working in Section 7. Deltash had turned down job offers worth more money than she could spend in a lifetime. She had declined interviews and book deals and speaking engagements. She just wanted to be Kira-chen cargo worker, but she walked differently now. She held her head higher, and when other species saw her coming, they moved aside, not because they feared her specifically, but because she represented something they hadn't fully understood about humans before, that underneath the friendly smiles and diplomatic courtesy, humans were survivors who would do whatever it took to keep living. One night, near the end of her shift, the young Fremen worker approached her nervously. "Can I ask you something?" He said, "Sure, if it happened again." He asked, "Would you do the same thing?" Kira thought about the question. Kira thought about the nightmares and the therapy sessions and the weight of knowing she had killed 3 people. She thought about the alternative. "Yes."
Ow.
She said, "I would, because the alternative was dying, and I'm not ready to die." The Fremen nodded slowly. "I hope I never have to make that choice." He said, "Me too," Kira replied. But if she did, she knew exactly what kind of person she would be. Same kind her grandfather had been, the same kind humans had always been when pushed into. A Corneray survivor, and as she walked through the corridors of the Verdant Exchange heading home after another shift, she couldn't help but smile, because the galaxy had learned something important. You could corner a human, you could cut off their escape, you could disable the cameras and make sure there were no witnesses, but that didn't mean you would survive the encounter. Humans had spent millions of years becoming the most dangerous thing on their planet, and old habits died very hard indeed.